Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Main Event, the history of the Champions League. I'm Martin, your host as always, and as always I'm joined by my two friends who to go through this time 06-07. Adam Thornton's here. How are we doing, Adam?
Yeah, good, thank you. This one is not one for the purists, I would say. There's a couple of groups with some high scoring. We're sort of missing the barnstorming knockout ties I think we've had, with the exception of one or two. We've been spoiled. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a good final. It's an interesting final. It charts, I think, the evolution of one of the great teams, certainly one of the great teams of the mid-2000s, if not the great team. And it sort of just nicely bookends their period. So yeah, looking forward to digging into it.
Cool. And David Edgar is here as well. Good evening, David.
Yeah, evening, lads. Every so often one comes along that had sort of slipped from your memory, and maybe it's just when we're over 30 years in that some of them obviously will rise to more prominence. And given the other final between these two clubs, then I think it's perhaps understandable that this one, unless you are an AC Milan fan, does. But there's always, things of interest in it. I think almost for Liverpool, a way to prove, well, that wasn't a fluke, and became damn near to repeating it with, I'd argue, possibly a slightly weaker squad.
Get into all that in due course. Okay, we were looking at the groups of 06-07 this week, and maybe one of the things, Adam, that means that this just isn't quite standing out is that we really are feeling familiarity with some of these matchups. And for the third year in a row, Chelsea meet Barcelona this time in the group stage, of course, rather than the knockouts, in a group with Werder Bremen and Levski Sofia. Chelsea come out on top here. They win the group. They beat Barcelona at home. There's a 2-2 draw in injury time in Catalonia. Barcelona only really coming through at all in the very last game. They beat Werder Bremen 2-0 at home to leapfrog them into the second qualifying space. But is this maybe it? We're going to meet again quite a few matchups that we've seen so often. There's maybe just a bit of familiarity here now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's a couple of teams that are evolving. Obviously, I think we're well used to Chelsea now. Some people at Chelsea were probably too used to Chelsea at this point, which I'm sure we'll come on to. And then Barcelona are just sort of starting, I guess, like we spoke about last week, to evolve into what they'll be. But there's a few others that are just sort of meandering along in the mid 2000s. So it kind of does have a little bit of a feel of sameness. And then, like you said, this being these two meeting again, especially when there's been so many highs on these, it's like, can they go again? The expectation becomes massive. Will it be another fantastic two games? And it really wasn't. I think Drogba carries Chelsea through, certainly through the group stages, and then some, which I guess is one of those things that I always find quite interesting, because from what I understand, and you guys might think differently, but the whole Mourinho Abramovich falling out piece was primarily around Shevchenko, I guess, or certainly that was a massive thread to it, where Mourinho didn't want him. Now, you can understand it because Drogba was his guy, and Drogba is on fire and will be on fire for a decade or so after this at Chelsea. But also Shevchenko, we're talking about one of the great Champions League players, one of the great European players that we have literally charted for the last 10 years or so of this that he's been in there. So I can kind of see both sides of it really, but it's just interesting how that dynamic can shift. An owner decides either he wants to be the guy who brings in the guy that scores all the goals to eventually win them the Champions League, or he just wants to have a swinging dick competition with a manager who has basically won everything before him. There's lots of little things starting in here. The appointment of Avram Grant as director of football, basically as a patsy, if you like, as an Abramovich plant who's going to do his bidding, keep an eye on things for him. So a little bit interesting how these dynamics shift all of a sudden, because they were flying for those 2 years. He's the most successful manager in Chelsea's history when he left, with all the titles that he managed to win. But just that, and for once, I don't necessarily think I potentially blame Mourinho fully for this. I think there is an element of Abramovich not being happy with what he's got and wanting this swashbuckling attacking football, possession play that just wasn't quite Mourinho. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic in this season. I don't think it definitely doesn't really spill over until post Christmas. But yeah, interesting. But certainly in these early games or early months, Drogba definitely carries them. He scores a lot of goals in these group stages.
Davey, you get Sheva, as Adams mentioned, Michael Ballack, Ashley Cole, that summer. Some others. Salman Kalou would do a decent turn for Chelsea. So would John Obi Mikel, or Mikel John Obi, depending on your preference. Most of those make sense, especially Cole, the best left back in the world. I would die on that particular hill at this particular moment. But Shevchenko was the one that, listen, we love him now, we loved him then, but Adam's right, it doesn't really fit. He is not required. And yeah, the seeds being sown for autumn of 08 or autumn of 07, when this really will instantly fall apart. And it's one of those things in football, the story seems instant. And how the fuck did that happen? That there's this report of a falling out, and all of a sudden Chelsea are on an absolute horrendous run, and he's out the door. When in fact, of course, the story's longer than that. But no one in 06, 07 is seriously predicting that this is coming to an end anytime soon.
No, because like a lot of the things in the Chelsea story, Abramovich as billionaire, billionaire owner rather, something that we have seen much more often since, was, if you like, almost the pioneer in that. And therefore, a lot of the things he did almost act as precedent. And what has become precedent is come in, get success for the ones who do. Then it's not enough to be successful. I want us to play like X. Barcelona in a couple of years will be the template that clubs do. Manchester City go out and basically hire that, don't they? They bring in the entire backroom staff to achieve that. So it's, yes, I want to win, then they win, then it's, and now I want to win in a certain way, playing a certain way. And the other thing is that this is an age-old struggle between managers and owners, as in who has the power within the club. Managers who are successful have an ego. They have to have, and they deserve to have, if you've done what Mourinho has done. But I always think it's a little bit like Alex Ferguson with the Coolmore Mafia, Martin. That football people, because they are in a closed world of which they are dominant, they forget that power doesn't extend into the real world. And when you take on a billionaire, you will likely lose. And what happens here is exactly that. It is beyond comprehension to the average football fan. And I dare say to Jose Mourinho that he will be allowed to leave Chelsea Football Club, much as it was for Brian Clough with Derby County all those years ago. So, we're not reinventing the wheel here. This has happened before. But in Abramovich's world, it's his club. And if you are a hired hand, and if you don't produce what he wants you to produce, or you don't toe the line, then you go. And managers make this play after a couple of seasons for control. This is not new. Benitez did it at Liverpool, as we know. Sometimes they achieve it. Ferguson and Wenger were almost, masters of all they surveyed at their clubs. Mourinho goes for that at a club with a billionaire owner, especially one like Abramovich, that just simply isn't feasible. Shevchenko is a football manager signing, and we weren't quite used to that, I think, in the UK at that time. Now, Real Madrid, for example, Silvio Berlusconi at Milan, we know that happened, that the owner would say, actually, I want him and therefore we're going to buy him and you're going to play him. But we weren't used to it in the UK. And on, paper and to us laymen, you're a great team and you're buying this amazing player. How can it not work? Adam explains why it doesn't work, because one, you play with one central striker. Two, he needs to be able to do these things, which you probably have the best in the world at those things currently. There is no space to play this other player. If you do, your team will actually lose a bit. I don't think you'd be lonely on that hill, Martin, with Ashley Cole, to be honest. I think most people would agree with that. John Obi Mikel, there was the huge, because remember, he was going to Manchester United, then he wasn't. But he was such a Chelsea of this era player, where he was fantastic on the ball, but he was athletic and strong and a real competitor in the middle of the park. That mixture of, if you like, elegance and steel that Mourinho had. But there's this one, and Ballack even had that as well. Ballack was a very physical player, and he was hard. He could take care of himself as well as being outrageously talented. But Shevchenko was the owner wanted him. He's Eastern Europeans glamour boy. You bring him in, and how can it not work? And then, for the reasons we've just explained, the billionaire owners tend not to blame themselves when it goes wrong. They tend to blame the person whose job it was to sort that out. And again, this is something that's as old as time, and we're seeing it right now in 2024 as we record with Kylian Mbappe, who has gone to Real Madrid and upset the balance of the side completely because, simply put, they didn't need him. He plays the same position as Vinicius. He occupies spaces that Jude Bellingham likes to go in. It's almost counterintuitive. You have a great side, you sign a brilliant player. It should work, but how often does it not? We see it all the time.
Yeah, if only Madrid had a historical blueprint for how that doesn't work, signing names rather than what they absolutely need. And you're right, David. Certainly, we weren't used to an owner to this degree making that kind of decision. It did happen. Asked Dick Advocate about Colin Hendry.
But
there were wee moments, but absolutely, this is my club, and you're very popular. And how often have we seen that with owners and managers, or managers and players, where it can only be the one god in that particular realm? Adam, a bit of a hangover, Barca. We will touch on them next week, but spoiler alert, they're going to go out early. It can happen.
Yeah, it can. I mean, they do okay in this group, like you said. We spoke about Werder Bremen and that good run that they had. 11 points for Barcelona is fine, but obviously when the third place team gets 10, it becomes a little bit nervier than it really needs to. It's really that game at the end where they win 2-0. Ronaldinho and Gudjohnsen score early on that finally qualifies them. But yeah, one of those situations, I think, for me, when you've had we've spoken about how difficult it is or was to mount another challenge in terms of get to the final, never mind going and winning it again, balancing that up with league pressure and trying to become the dominant team in La Liga again as well. I guess it's only natural when you're at that start phase of the project that something like that could happen, and then when you put them in against a very good Chelsea team still at this point, and then, as we've said, Werder Bremen having a bit of their final moment in the sun, I think it will be this year. It is just one of those ones, but yeah, it was not as comfortable as they'd have liked for sure.
Yeah, I really liked Diego in this period at Bremen.
Yeah.
And he goes to Juventus, and I at the time thought, oh, that's a really exciting and interesting move, and didn't quite happen for him because Werder are a big club, but they're not Juventus, right? There was a big fish in a small pond thing going on there. But this is, if you are a big club and a club with the holders, and club with the expectations, this is one of those sticky groups where there's one side who are the whipping boys. Levski Sofia, 1 goal scored, 17 conceded, no points, right? And then there's another side who are pretty good. And you don't have the couple of sides scrapping and taking points each other for the UEFA Cup spot. So it gets sticky. And to Werder Bremen in a group like that, to get 10 points and not go through, you can't. I mean, that is very unlucky, because 10 points, I think most clubs in any year of the Champions League have a right to expect that it'll be enough. But it wasn't a blip this season for Barcelona. This was who they were. Maybe the hunger just dropped off a little bit. We've seen it before, and I'm sure we'll see it again.
Okay. Group B, again, some heavy hitters. Bayern Munich and Inter going through, Spartak Moscow and Sporting Club. Miles behind in the final wash-up. David, I'll come to you because Adam hates Bayern. They're going to do all right now, actually. I mean, they're going to be something a bit more interesting, a bit more youthful. Podolski, I'm pretty sure this is his first season at Bayern. Maybe seeing Schweinsteiger come into his own. You've still got the experience of Roy Mackay and some old timers like Santa Cruz and all that kicking about. There's something happening. This is post a very good World Cup for Germany, when it was expected maybe not to be. They were nowhere near quoted as getting to semi-final in that particular summer, at home, of course. There's maybe something stirring in Bavaria.
Yeah, there's a little bit going on here. They've got a good centre-back pair in Lucio, who I'm sure we all remember, but also Daniel Van Buiten. Remember the enormous Beanpole Belgian? I think he was 6'7", and they form a pretty solid barrier back there. Philip Lahm is now really, establishing himself as the footballer that we all knew he was capable of being. But also in the middle of the park, they've got Mark van Bommel, and he's next to the aforementioned Schweinsteiger, and that's a solid side, having that back line and then them in front of it. Roy Mackay is, as reliable as ever this season. He's still banging them in. Podolski is playing. Claudio Pizarro was a player that I always liked and maybe just slipped through the net a little bit in terms of attention. There's only so much attention that you can have, but he was always a pretty consistent goal scorer for them, giving them this option. And they are more progressive, I would say, than they maybe have been in previous iterations. They're a good side. They are physically strong still, which is, I always think, a hallmark of a Barca side. But there are footballers in that side as well, but they are strong defensively. I actually thought this year they were maybe another striker away from a serious challenge, because I think they had the solidity in there. But they were heavily relying on Mackay. Although Pizarro, Podolski chipped in, I still thought that they could maybe do with someone else in there to just add to that. One of the joys of doing this show is going back and remembering things. And I mean, there's a real good shout, by the way, for Lucio for being one of the defenders of that decade. And it's funny because really he'll get the appreciation at Inter, in that fabulous win that they have in 2010. But I think that was almost Sean Connery in the Name of the Rose Oscar. I think by then it was people saying, "Oh yeah, we've been aware of you for 10 years. You are good, yeah." And he sort of got elevated into that. But this was a decent, and this group actually pans out differently to the one we've just spoken about, where you do have the two teams who are scrapping. This one goes, I wouldn't say totally to form, because I would have predicted Sporting to get past Spartak, which they don't. Although it's tight, they both finish on 5 points. But Bayern 12 and through, Inter 10 and through, comfortably enough. 5 points then to the next, and no real doubt about who's going through. Bayern don't lose a game in it. Inter lose 2, and there's your difference. Bayern draw a lot. I think it's 3 wins and 3 draws. But I did think this year that it's odd to say the word dark horse about Bayern Munich, but I certainly didn't have them in the top rank of favourites, but it wouldn't have surprised me had they went very deep into this competition. I just thought they were equipped for it without being spectacular.
Adam, if the summer of 2006 was joyful in Germany, it was briefly for Italy, of course, with the World Cup. But after that's concluded, it really is back down to earth with a bump, dealing with Calciopoli, dealing with the fallout from that, dealing with their place now in the pecking order. Inter come out, obviously, strongest. Waited a long time for a title, been handed a few or whatever, and now very much in pole position to kind of fill their boots. And they kind of did that summer, didn't they? Maicon, Patrick Vieira, and Vieira and Zlatan from Juve, I think. Juve having to sell quite a fair bit. They're stockpiling now for a few years.
Yeah, and I mean, why wouldn't you? They're taking advantage while they can. It was quite fortuitous, shall we say, that they got given that one. I think this is this the period where Ibrahimovic wins a title every season?
Yes,
yeah, he's on his run now. Yeah.
Yes, he's
4 or 5 different clubs.
Yeah, I think it lasts all the way till he goes to Manchester United from PSG.
Yeah. But yeah, they've got a really good team. I'd like to just correct you from earlier on if I can, Martin. I'm not one to hold a grudge. I quite like Bayern Munich at this point. For some of the reasons that David mentioned, they've got some good players that I quite like.
He's so changeable, isn't he, Martin? He's so changeable. You can never get a handle on Adam.
Such a talent.
And what I would say is coming up in a couple of years, Arjen Robben, Ribery, Müller.
He is an Arjen. Adam is an Arjen Robben.
Oh, love him.
I believe the kids call it Stan these days.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
I think if you're a huge fan of somebody, but I've seen people describe that, and you are the equivalent of a Swiftie, but for Arjen Robben, a Robben-y.
That's true. A couple of years now they go through that little period. They've obviously got 2010 coming up in terms of the World Cup, where they sort of announced themselves with guys like Neuer and Ozil and Müller and stuff. So yeah, I don't mind them at this point, right up until the Guardiola era. Anyway, I think Inter are stockpiling, like you said. That's a really good word for it. Some of those guys coming in it's like, do you want to just come here? There's nobody else really kicking about. Milan or I mean, they're obviously doing more than okay this year, but they're sort of on their downward curve now, eventually, after 14, 15 years of pretty constant success there. Juve, as we said, are literally gone at this point. So yeah, they are stockpiling. They win the league. Ibrahimovic and Crespo scored a fair amount of goals for them this year. They've got Toldo on goals as well, who I really liked. Loads of
Grosso as well. Good picking Grosso, him up from Palermo, was it?
This is the peak, I think, for South American bastard centre halves. Certainly. And in Serie A, although Lucio will qualify, I know he'll get there eventually, but you've got Cordoba there as well. That's the era that I enjoyed. This Walter Samuel we covered a couple of weeks ago as well. You still could get these players in Serie A. They hadn't fallen off the face of the cliff completely at this point, but I think within a couple of years, the Premier League officially takes over as the number one league. I want to say around about 2008, and then we start to see a bit more of a migration to the La Liga and the Premier League. But for now, although the star is on the wane for Serie A, there are still a right few good players there, and it is still an attractive place to go as that squad shows.
Liverpool had to qualify against Maccabi Haifa and made kind of heavy weather of it. Them and Milan had to qualify for this Champions League, are running all the way to the final, of course. They had in their group PSV, Bordeaux and Galatasaray. And again, Liverpool fairly comfortable then. They could afford to lose in Turkey on that final day. Adam, again, you got Peter Crouch, the Fowler's back in
Bellamy.
Action. Bellamy's there now. Where does this team, how does it compare to couple of years ago, and is it just hobbling things together, Adam, really?
Yeah, so again, changing my mind from week to week, but dare I say at some of these group stages, Liverpool looked almost fun. Lots of goals. Peter Crouch's ridiculous overhead kick that I'm still not really sure how he managed against Galatasaray. The size of him and those beanpole legs, how he's managed to contort himself. But they were potentially fun, I think, at this point. They don't feel quite as cobbled together. Certainly for me, you've got peak Gerrard in here. There's some sensible signings there. I think Bellamy was a decent player for them. So yeah, I'm not necessarily thinking that they're going to go on a fantastic run. They've obviously got their ownership. Well, they think they've got their ownership issues resolved. They very much don't. So yeah, there's an element of, I think, them hoping to get to where they want to get to. But for me, there's also potentially an element of maybe Manchester United 2017, 2018-ish, where we're trying some things. We'll see what happens. It doesn't quite pan out for them. But yeah, I would say, and I've not been a fan of Liverpool for quite a few years on this, I would say they were bordering on fun in that group, which, again, David mentioned there, it helps when you've got a team that pick up no points. This one was pretty even. I think obviously Liverpool managed to get through despite losing the Galatasaray game, which I guess gives Galatasaray a bit more of a shine. But it could have went either way. I think you're going into the last few games with your favourite jeopardy, which always helps. Maybe it's through a lack of actual quality than anything else, but jeopardy is jeopardy, isn't it?
There's a couple of interesting things with this Liverpool squad. First of all, Dirk Kuyt comes in and is immediately converted from this rampaging goal scorer, which he was in the Eredivisie, to a workhorse wide player, which he does to the very best of his ability. He does uncomplainingly for them. They start the season with Sissoko in the middle of the park, but they end it with Javier Mascherano from West Ham. Yeah. And that is a serious piece of upgrade. And you then add that you've got Mascherano and Xabi Alonso in there behind Gerrard, and that's a midfield you can take to the bank, but they don't have it all season. Fairly comfortably in the Champions League spots, get there by 8 points at the end of the year. But interestingly, I know that listeners like when we give them a little stat they weren't expecting. Xabi Alonso made the second most appearances, including substitutes appearances, by the way, for Liverpool this season, alongside Steven Gerrard. Do you know who was Liverpool's most featured player, most appearances in this season?
For the whole season?
For the whole season. One more, 52 appearances. Gerrard and Alonso, 51 are next. It is.
I want to say Carragher?
Nope, it was a great shout, but it was Jermaine Pennant.
Bloody hell.
And that one, folks, knocked me off my chair when I read it. 52 appearances that season, which again is indicative of kind of where they are. They did have Bolo's ending. And that was an interesting little cameo in his career, because he'd obviously been started off at PSV, gone to one of the few non-Ajax players in that Barcelona team at the start of the turn of the century. But he went to Middlesbrough, remember, where he was fantastic. They played him almost a central midfielder, and he was terrific. And he gets the move to Liverpool. Didn't quite pan out for him there. But again, sort of like their side from a couple of years ago, this is a bit of an odds and sods squad. There's some real quality, and then there's quite a big drop to a lot of, I'm struggling, run-of-the-mill players.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was trying to think of the word to find that, like Barclays players.
Yeah, like decent enough guys who made money and played well in professional football, but not guys you think are taking you to Champions League final. And again, it's one of these things. I think if you take this Liverpool squad and you put it in the colours of Arsenal or Manchester United or Chelsea, I don't think it gets the Champions League final. I think the DNA of the club again, comes through at times in this run. Yeah. Because the gap between their first choice, because I've just explained that midfield there by the end of the season, because Mascherano only arrives halfway through, is terrific. But, around that, there are gaps.
There's signings there, I think, Martin, the way that I would describe it is, you look back and some of the signings that Man City made at the start, if you like, not even at the start, maybe like 2010, 2011, some of the guys that are coming in, Stephen Ireland, Olivier Dacour, guys that you'd be like, okay, they're from where they were. This is a big step up. Obviously not anywhere near where they want to get to, but I think you could probably sum up Liverpool in this way. They're buying some of those signings that are decent to good players, as David mentioned, in the league, but there isn't quite the structure around about it. And I think you compare that to 10 years later on when Jurgen Klopp comes in and he's buying guys like Andy Robertson and James Milner from lesser teams in Premier Leagues or maybe their stars are on the wane, but he's got a bit more round about them, where he goes and buys the players round about them, or the players come through round about them that really give him what he needs. So yeah, there's an element of a little bit of wonkiness here. Still some really good players. David mentioned a few there. Daniel Agger as well, someone that I really liked as a centre half for Liverpool. Obviously loads of injuries, but he was here at this point. And then obviously the season later they'll bring in Torres as well, who could probably go as probably be classed as the new Shevchenko as far as Abramovich will be concerned in a couple of years. But
yes,
he comes in and he comes in, and along with Suarez a couple of years later, and that midfield that David mentioned, they do become more than fun. They're a good team. Yeah.
We will talk about PSV in a bit more detail next week, I think, because they're going to spring a pretty big surprise in the knockouts. But anyone who's been paying attention to PSV these couple of years, maybe that shouldn't be too much of a big shock. The next group, David, I'll go to you. One of the major beneficiaries of the Calciopoli thing was Roma. They were technically fifth in Serie A the year before, but Juve's points, of course, all disappeared. Milan and Fiorentina got a bit of a hit, which pushed Roma up into second place. And they found themselves in a group with Valencia, with whom they have sparred recently before as well. Olympiacos, rock bottom, and Shakhtar Donetsk, another Ukrainian side into our conversation. But what is happening at Roma? They didn't make massive signings. I don't think they didn't pilfer the rest of the weakened opponents in the way that Inter did. Spalletti, what's been there a year now, and again this kind of rebirth. The most Roman man of all time, Francesco Totti, is still there, still scoring, still brilliant.
Yeah, they won the Coppa Italia this year. Which, they hadn't won a lot of trophies in recent memory, so it was a big year for them. They're good in this group. They get off to a cracking start, 4-0 victory over Shakhtar, who, at the time were a good side, Shakhtar Donetsk, and certainly worthy of respect. Go to Greece and win. Maybe I think our slight love-in with Greece is coming to an end within the Champions League. But then draw the return leg, which puts them in a bit of bother, but they get the victory in the final match against Roma to take them through. An interesting squad this year, this Roma team. Panucci, who was a guy I always liked, I thought was a good player. Christian Chivu, remember him? The Romanian that they got from Ajax. He was a super player. I really, really liked him. He was excellent. Philippe Mexes, the centre-back, who was one of these guys who had to have been good the games I didn't watch. That, I think, would be the description of him. But the one they were most excited about was a young Italian, and it's funny, we've just been talking about Liverpool, called Alberto Aquilani, who was given the title the Prince of Rome fairly early because of his early form. And interestingly enough, after going to Liverpool for a lot of money at the time, 20 million, which we've gone to in a couple of years, and not doing well, kind of put English clubs off buying from Serie A for a bit. It was sort of seen as doesn't really transfer out of that league. But in this period, he is, an absolutely terrific player. Up front, almost totally still reliant on Francesco Totti. He is still the man for them. They've got Vucinic, the Turkish striker, and he's still producing for them. But yeah, they are still very reliant on Francesco Totti. An inconsistent side, a cup side, clearly, to get in there and get it. But to pick up a trophy this season, to get into Champions League and get through the group, I think you'd consider it a success.
Definitely. What's Spalletti doing, Adam? Anything of interest?
Yes, I think Spalletti's great. I love him. Obviously, he won the title with Napoli, a club I'm really fond of a couple of years ago. I just think he's just a really intelligent manager, not one of the managers that gets plaudits in terms of being innovative, or he hasn't particularly got great PR about himself. But I think he has a bit of a trailblazer. I always remember coming back from one of the Rangers European trips that we were on a couple of years ago, and he was talking about how there aren't really any positions or tactics anymore in football, or formations. It's a kind of dying art, and that was only a couple of years ago. And even myself, who likes to keep an eye on that, was thinking, really, that can't be true. And now where we are in 2024, teams are, well, according to Mikel Arteta, sometimes teams will have 30, 35 formations in a game, and things are a lot more fluid than they even were a few years ago. So he is a bit of an innovator, I think, or certainly an innovative thinker. And I think in this year, 2006, it's quite a seminal moment. Obviously, as we've said there, Calciopoli gives them a bit of an opening, but you still need to go and do it. The false nine, I think, is the big thing for Spalletti. Now, most people think the modern rebirth of the false nine is obviously under Leo Messi when Guardiola pitches up in Barcelona in 2008. But actually, Totti's doing it this year. What I guess you could describe his setup as a bit of a 4-6-0. To be honest, Totti dropping in. Needs to be a good passer in there, which he is. He must have those vertical runs from midfield to allow him to play the balls through. So yeah, it's a bit of a 4-6-0 or maybe a 4-1-5 if you want to call it that. But there's no defined focal point when you think about all these strikers we've been talking about, Drogba, even Shevchenko, but guys like Ibrahimovic, Vieri, Batistuta, all these guys that are talking about. This was very innovative for the time, playing a number 10 as a false nine, if you like, and he did it very, very well. So much chaos there. I think it was also an opportunity as well. Vucinic was injured quite a bit. Roma didn't have a lot of money, and obviously Calciopoli's going on in the background at this point, so there's not exactly going to be floods and floods of investment into Serie A. So he just kind of had to make do with what he had, and what he did have was Daniele De Rossi, who is one of the best holding midfielders of all time. Yeah, he's got a really good defence as well. Not a terrific defence, but solid enough.
Solid. Well, here's the thing about this team, Adam, this Roma team, and in a way they remind me of actually Liverpool this season that we just spoke about. The squad depth and the gap from the top players to the ones below them was massive. But when it went well, I mean, there's that 4-0 we've talked about. The Coppa Italian at this stage in its history is two-legged. The first, they're playing Inter, who are, the champions, right? Strongest squad. They beat them 6-2. When they had everybody there and fit, this was a cracking side. The problem was the inconsistency along the way. But
we'll come on to a game where it very much did not go to
plan. Did not go to plan. But as you said, this was a side that were innovative, that were fun to watch. The problem was, again, they didn't have the base level. This was not a side that could squeak out a 1-0, away from home when they weren't playing well. If they were playing well, they could take anybody on. If they were playing badly, we'll come to that.
Yeah, but I think he's a really interesting character, and it was, for me, being into Serie A and been into European football in general, it was a little bit of a shame, I think, to see him Spalletti move to Zenit for those few years, because he just sort of goes out of sight, out of mind at a time where I think if he moved to the Premier League or something would have been really interesting for him to come in there and see what he could do at one of those clubs. So yeah, I think it's right to shine a bit of light on them at this point, albeit there's probably a few asterisks against anything from Italy round about now, but really interesting team, nowhere near as talented as their team was that won the Scudetto 5 or 6 years ago. But I think that probably nicely sums up the decline that Serie A had over that period.
Yeah, Martin, we spoke a few weeks ago about the spending in Serie A, that last splurge round about kind of 2000 up to about 2003, from about 99 to 2003, where it was almost like that they were trying to prove, no, screw this Premiership, we're still the big boys. The chickens are now coming home to roost. Adam mentioned there, people are not going to invest in Italian football now because it's scandal hit and the Premiership is becoming what it is. But that's why, Roma in particular suffer badly. That's why they have to sell Aquilani, a year later, because they were in a financial mess for years and years and years. They were just a club that seemed to just make terrible decisions constantly. And in that period, they're very lucky that they had two players in De Rossi and Totti who just never agitated for it. In fact, would have point blank turned the move down.
I think that can't be understated, just how loyal and in love with the club those two key players are. It just gives you a bit of a ballast, doesn't it? Conscious of time, Valencia doing it again. Really, they just keep going back to the well and regenerating themselves. I was going to say Fernando, because Morientes comes in, right, and he scores a few goals in this group. I was going to say he's raging against the dying of the light, but he's only 30. He just appears to have been around forever. A young David Villa, I think he'd kind of come up the scene at Valencia the year before with quite a few goals, but again following that up, and we know where his career is heading very quickly. But Valencia top the group, and they will do battle with an Italian team in the knockouts. And by do battle, I mean very, very literally. But we'll come to that next week. Group E, Lyon top very convincingly, 4 wins, 2 draws. Real Madrid in second. Steaua Bucharest, my word, not heard them for a bit. And their old pals Dynamo Kiev very much languishing at the bottom. Adam, Leon, Benzema now, Fred, who around this time much was thought of or hoped. They're just looking so good. And a lot of chat that, okay, all these big guns, the money in the Premier League, there's the hope of someone from just outside that stable maybe coming through them, and PSV, of course, knocking at the door as well. But these are the two clubs outside of England and Spain and Italy. They're just continually showing that they've got something about them. They're well run, they're well put together, and they cruise through this group. And this is Real Madrid fun time, so I appreciate it's maybe not the best of the best, but they're just continuing to look good early, shall we say?
Yeah, I remember this. I still remember being shocked at this. Lyon beating Madrid, and such, even Lyon beating Madrid. To be honest, at this point, I still remember being, oh wow, but then going through as the winners. And this is obviously Houllier back in France for the first time, well, back in club management in France for, I don't know, the first time was even a manager in club sides in the 90s. I'm not sure. So quite a while. But he's back here, giving himself a bit of a breather, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, he had a really interesting team here. Obviously, guys that will go on and be Premiership players. Milan Baros, Flora Maluda, who was a player that I really liked, particularly when he went to went to Chelsea. Janino, those free kicks, everybody will remember Janino's free kicks from Lyon. And yeah, Fred's was one that I quite like. Revilliere was another one as well, who for me was a bit of a throwback. We've covered guys like Vincent Candela or Zambrotta who could play on either side. I thought Revilliere was a bit underrated, and he fit that system that they had perfectly. So yeah, I think we have threatened to touch on Lyon in depth for a while, so it's maybe something that we can pick up on one of the later shows. But I was, maybe this is why I don't know, when we started these shows we were thinking, didn't really realise that French football was so competitive in the 90s, or that there was somebody just appearing every couple of years. Maybe it's the Lyon thing that's stunted our brains, because they are completely dominant at this point, and then it sort of feels like, I'm sure there's an intervening period, in fact I know there is, but it sort of then feels like when Lyon go away, PSG appear. So maybe it's just our mind playing tricks on us, that it's impossible for it to ever have been competitive when you've had two teams that have dominated it pretty much for the last 20 years. So yeah, no taking it away from them, but personally I think it'd be nice to see a bit more of a variance and a bit more of a challenge at this point from some of the other French teams.
Well, there's one that we'll come to in a minute. Let's look at Lyon in detail the next season, shall we? That seems appropriate. And Juninho did take free kicks from Lyon, even when the game was in Madrid. It probably still reached the goal. Yeah, let's move on, David, to Manchester United's group, which of course had Celtic in it, and Benfica and Copenhagen. Celtic under Strachan now, rather than O'Neill. They 9 points, 3 home wins, 3 home defeats. They simply cannot buy a win away from home. A very entertaining first game at Old Trafford. Momentum swings all over the place, but United won 3-2. Eviscerated in Lisbon, battered in Copenhagen as well, but very, very strong at home. As I said, all 3 games. It's exactly what Martin O'Neill did in 2001, 02, wasn't it? And it wasn't enough. It was here. It's just the way group football goes, isn't it? But maybe Strachan a wee bit more suited to European football, or is it just a case of Celtic players just a wee bit more experience? It's going to happen at some point. They're going to get through, because again, remember, other than 92-93 in that inaugural year, Scottish clubs have waited till the season before we're talking about now, where Rangers got through, to get out of this bloody group system. It's been a bit of a disgrace, really, but they're going to do it. They're going to do it for a wee while. What was the difference, I think, in those two setups, if there was one?
I think that within this particular Celtic team, that they weren't quite so physical as the O'Neill team were. I mean, they still had physical players, but they had a bit more craft to them, this particular Celtic team, I would say, because you get refereed differently in European competition. What has absolutely taken hold is the psychological thing of that they can beat anyone at home. But what has also taken hold is they can't beat anyone away. And I mean, this is an ongoing thing for them up to present day. But they at home, some of those atmospheres were, huge and certainly affected them. Nakamura gave them a wee bit more craft, as I say, in the centre part. They weren't quite. I mean, the O'Neill team was a big side. They played and won a lot of free kicks. They had runners in the part. They had guys like Agat and Petrov who were runners. Here they are able to hold the ball a bit more. And that hill that you died on, I'm coming up to light my funeral pyre about Scottish teams. It's inability to hold on to the ball.
Yeah.
That is the most damaging thing in Europe, because particularly for Rangers and Celtic, domestically, these are clubs that when they give the ball away, they get it back pretty quickly. In Europe, give the ball away, you might not see it for 10 minutes. And this has been a black mark against Scottish teams for years and years and years. Basically, once we couldn't just run over the top of teams. But it is Celtic's home form that does them some huge nights. Unfortunately, not something I particularly enjoyed watching, and they do enough to get through. Strangely unloved Strachan though. I don't know if it was.
Well, that's the point I was trying to kind of make with Davey. Yeah, because Neil, I think, not just at Celtic, I think his career is wildly overrated as a manager, or has too much love than he probably should have. I think he could get football stopped at times because of just how brutal his teams were. But he is just so beguiling a character in panels and TV studios, and football media people loved him. They just loved him. We could not wait to have him on because he'd crack a funny in a maybe a more cerebral way than Gordon Strachan's funnies that got very annoying very, very quickly. He just had a tetchier kind of personality, tetchier kind of reputation, and I think there was a resistance to give him any love, even in Scotland, where
he's not.
I'm exactly struggling to give Celtic manager praise.
Well, exactly right. I mean, generally speaking, he doesn't get spoken out. They don't refer back to this period, do they? They sort of skip over this and go straight to the O'Neill period. There was never a fondness. Strachan is tough to love, almost deliberately so. He is aggressive. He's rude. I mean, he is in dealings with them, and you speak to people in Scottish football that had dealings with him off camera. He's rude. He's very arrogant. I just don't think he's a particularly pleasant guy, but he exudes that in a way that maybe other people keep it hidden, or are able to demonstrate a softer side. In his defence, I don't think he cares. I really genuinely think he's one of these people who have the gift of not giving a toss what anyone thinks about them. But for the Celtic fans, they had O'Neill. He was everything they wanted. He was Irish. He was paranoid. He was, very much in their wheelhouse, and unfortunately, he was successful. But Strachan came along and did evolve the side and did move them on a little bit. But they never really took to him whatsoever. But he did do something O'Neill didn't do, which is take them out. Now, O'Neill's argument, and it would be a fair one, is but I put them in the position. I was the John the Baptist here kind of thing, and that is a legit argument. That this group, Benfica, are inconsistent. In this group, they probably should get through when you look at the squad. United are really roaring back here, not just in the Champions League. They're roaring back domestically after, as we mentioned last week, or in the last season rather, the eulogies have been written for Alex Ferguson, and he comes and he's got this different side. Martin had mentioned before some of the signings, Evra, etc., have come in and they add a little bit to it. He's got his workhorses, the guys that Park Ji-sung and Darren Fletcher and whatnot, no world beaters, but it is a good United side, and they have that front line, which you should be able to make a go of it when you've got those players in your front line. But Celtic, had it. If we win our home games, we've got a really good chance of getting through here, and they do. Away from home, absolute shadow. This is a bipolar side. They believe they can take any side in Europe domestically at home. They do not believe they could beat an Icelandic side away.
You're just getting on a plane. It's an issue. Okay. Let's try and move forward, gents. 2 groups to go. I'll be honest. In researching this last group, Adam, I felt the point where I think this project of ours is reaching its end, and I'm getting to the stage where I want to wrap it up pretty quickly, because Arsenal are playing in the Emirates, and it feels like 2 weeks ago, and they look exactly like the Arsenal of 23-24, and it freaked me out that this was no longer a history show, and they just looked tangible. I could go out and touch some of these performances. But back on the bike, Adam, after the disappointment of Paris, they win their group with Porto, joint top, I guess, in both 11 points. CSKA Moscow and Hamburg. I've not seen them involved for a while. But
that's what tells you it's a history show.
Hamburg being the Champions League, it keeps us grounded back in the past. But you know what I mean? That instantly, this feels so modern. Their first season at the Emirates.
Completely. Yeah, I agree, and it's their era is ending. I think it's safe to say Henry will go in the summer 2007. I think that sort of not the catalyst. I think I'm not sure even Henry could have saved them over the few seasons after that. But it certainly does feel like the end of an era, and therefore, to your point, the new era. Here, yeah, it's a very Arsenal group stages. I think we've covered them on here several times. Okay performances, kind of struggling through, never really in much danger though, to be fair. And I think that is, I think what sums them up is what happens in the next round for me. And I think it's maybe worth just sort of shining a bit of a light on it just now. We have spoken about it a few times in terms of this downfall piece, and I'm sure we'll get to it. But it's certainly starting now. I think most people, including Sir Alex Ferguson, reckon that Wenger started his downfall 2004-ish, around about that whole Pizzagate situation, but more importantly, I guess that game, whereby Man United won 1-2-0, with the infamous battles in the tunnel and all that sort of stuff. I think Ferguson himself says that's where he kind of lost it, Wenger, as far as he was concerned. It was a bit of a watershed moment, and I don't disagree. You've got the high of getting to the final, obviously, like we spoke about last week, but I think from now, certainly, the stadium, as you mentioned, I think to give him his place, he modernises things. We said that before he came in the 90s, and he modernised culture, style of play, scouting, diet, all that sort of stuff. But what I think hasn't happened, and it's something that Ferguson was a master of, is that evolution. Once you've done something once, to go and do it 1, 2, 3 times. Mourinho comes in and turbocharges everything, rightly or wrongly. Chelsea amp it up for everybody, as Man City will a few years later. And whether it's stubbornness from Wenger or whether it is lack of finances, I'm not sure. It's probably both. But I think for me, the big downfall piece, I think, for Arsenal and Wenger at this point, because both are so closely linked, is I think when you start to adopt a negative mindset, even if it's for holier than thou principles, or you think you're doing it for the good of the game or whatever, I just think when you adopt, this is what I'm doing is good and everything else is bad, but I'm also raging against the world, I think that just seeps through into everything. I think it's just easy to get caught up in a downward spiral. Then that culture of just being good enough or just doing enough doesn't really help, because you're now getting to this stage where it is a big four. It will become a big six in theory. It'll become a big six, but at this point, it is a big four in the Premier League. And when you can get to the Champions League by finishing fourth, you're then sort of allowing Wenger to sort of wallow in his negative mindset and his just enough type thing. And I just don't think that breeds the competitive spirit that Arsenal need. Had there been a situation here where only the top two can get into the Champions League, and the money that you would need to get to finance the stadium upgrade and all that sort of stuff, we might have seen them take more gambles, or maybe bring in some more sure things to try and force the team along. I think because that wasn't there, I personally think there was an opportunity for him to double down on his ideals, but it came at the cost of a winning mentality, or really trying to push the club forwards significantly, like the other 3 or 4 really that will come. We're doing that. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but I do think it's quite a bit of it is self-inflicted, and it didn't need to all be because of the stadium moving and saving the money. There's more than one way to skin a cat.
I mean, some of their ins that summer looked on paper sensible. Thomas Rosicky, great player. That looked lovely. Julio Baptista looked an absolute monster and didn't really kind of come off at all.
Gallas.
Gallas comes in. Ashley Cole went to Chelsea for £5 million plus William Gallas.
Mad.
No,
yeah.
I liked William Gallas, but that was very much Chelsea getting the beneficiary. And a couple of youngsters, Danielson didn't really work, and Alex Song, who would
it was decent.
to put in a kind of shift. But yeah,
I do take your point completely. Some of those signings in isolation look quite good, but I think we might have mentioned it last year. You're losing Bergkamp, you're losing Pires, you're losing Sol Campbell, Reyes, even Pascal Sigan, who, I mean, not great, but physical presence.
The first three you mentioned are key players of one of the best teams they've ever put together. Lauren, but you're not bringing in leaders to replace them. They're influential players.
Here's a bigger point. I know time is against us. It's maybe something we can develop in another week. Managers do this when they've been at a club for a while. That when the big individuals leave, they want to replace them with almost a collective, because they don't want those big challenging people, because their mentality has changed. When you first arrive at a big club, you need to win those players over, because they have the status at the club and you don't. But then you do have the status at the club, and human nature dictates you don't want people challenging you. That's exactly what happened with Wenger here. And then he doesn't have those strong characters. Think of the characters in the early years of that Arsenal team, and not just your back four, but, Manuel Petit, Patrick Vieira, Dennis Bergkamp, etc. Robert Pires, right? Confident, big characters. Then you've got Ian Wright. Then you've got a lovely bunch of boys. See this Arsenal team by about 2010. They could date my daughter. I wouldn't have a problem with any of them coming home. The Arsenal team of 2002, they're all bastards. I'd be like, right, what are your intentions with my daughter? And I think it's a conscious thing by managers where they're like, right, no, I don't need that anymore. I don't want people coming in and challenging me. I want a nice bunch of boys who do what they're told and understand I run the show at this club. And that's exactly what Wenger does.
Yeah. Very much the soonest appraisal of that Arsenal team. Final group: Milan, Lille, AEK Athens, of course, for Greek pals going to the FA Cup, and Anderlecht. We'll talk about Milan and their return next week, or over the next couple of weeks, certainly. Lille, they're going through. They were second, then third, I think, in Ligue 1 under Claude Puel. Just looking at this, Johan Cabaye, Peter Odemwingie, it's just the most mid-table English kind of selection. It's just so... I would reserve my most Gallic of shrugs for Lille this particular season, unless I am missing something. Hazard will be going there soon, though.
Yeah, Hazard will be going through it. They're a strange side. They don't inspire much, discussion at all outside France. But you look at the some of the young guys they're bringing through, Stefan Lichtsteiner, who would go into Juventus, the Swiss player, Kevin Morales, Belgian, that we would get to know quite well over the next few years. They had Obraniak, who was a good player. But you're right, this is like, they just don't seem to register, despite, as you've mentioned, Martin, some fairly respectable Champions League showings over the years. But I think if you speak to football fans in the UK and you speak about PSG, obviously, right? But, you speak to them about Lyon. Adam mentioned there. Speak to any football fan, the type of person who's listening to this. Remember Lyon? Oh, Janino's free kicks. And, I remember watching...
Sonny Anderson and blah, blah, blah. Even there's a space of time where
Benzema, right. Marseille, people remember things. Leo, you mention anyone, what do they all say? Oh, Eden Hazard started there, didn't he? And that is it. I don't know. They just don't register on it. They are the level 42 of the Champions League.
Yeah, they win the league in a couple of years' time. That crossover between Lyon and PSG that I mentioned felt like a neat handover, and we see a couple of those players come into Premier League. Luca Dean starts there. Obviously, still going great guns at Villa. Gervinho was part of that front three with Moussa Sow and Hazard as well. Cabaye, I think you mentioned, was obviously there as well. So there are quite a few that come in. But yeah, I think it is probably Eden Hazard. Those 2 or 3 years he has there where he's sensational. Funnily enough, coincides with Lille doing quite well, and they never quite recapture it afterwards. But yeah, they're a bit of a footnote in this one for sure. It's a few years before.
Okay, that wraps up the groups for 06-07. Thank you, David.
An absolute pleasure as always, lads. And if there's one thing I'm taking out of this, and I'm sorry if I offend any fans of this club, I like your club, but I stand by this. If there's one thing I'm taking out of this, Arsenal are the greatest underachievers in the Champions League. history.
I think we've established that long
Definitely.
before now, but it's certainly rubber stamped in this particular season. Thank you, Adamski.
Thank you.
Knockout time next week. Until then, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day.